Welcome back to Just a Minute, Just a Mishnah. This is Mishnah L'Nishmas Fredele Basrachan, L'Schos Aveli V'Yitzchak Ben Gila, and their first Ser Basuiva. So Mesachas Bava metziah Perak Yud Mishnah Hey Mishnah Vav Misha Yikos Samach Liginas Chaverai V'Nofal. So if someone has a wall which is adjacent to his friend's garden and it falls over into his friend's garden, and the owner of the garden says, "Get your stones out of my garden," and he says, "Here, just take the stones." So if the owner of the garden doesn't want to take the stones, so then the owner of the wall and the stones has to get rid of his stones. If someone has if the owner of the garden takes the stones, and then the owner of the wall has second thoughts, and he says, "Fine, give me back my stones, and I'll pay you." So then it's already too late, and he doesn't get his stones back. If someone hires a worker, let's say to cut the wheat in his field, and the worker does it, and then the employer says to him, "You know what, I don't want to pay you, just take the wheat that you cut," so he's not allowed to do that. Misha Kiblav, but if the guy said, "Fine, you know what, I'll take the wheat," and then the employer goes back on himself and says, "You know what, give me my wheat and I'll pay you." In Sharmalai, so if the guy doesn't want to give back the wheat, if the worker doesn't want to give back the wheat, so he doesn't have to. If someone's taking out fertilizer into public property, which you're not allowed to do, he's allowed to take it out through public property, but he's not allowed to just dump it there, even though they used to do that. They used to leave it in public property for people to step on, because then it makes it better, because then you could damage someone, because someone will slip in it, and they'll get damage from it, so you're not allowed to do that. You can't leave cement out in public property, and you can't make stones, because in both these cases they would leave it out to dry, and then people could fall over them or slip in them, etc., and get damaged. But you can mix cement in public property, just you can't dump it there. But you can't mix bricks because it takes much more time, and you end up having to leave it, and it's more likely that someone's going to get damage from it. Someone's building a public property. So if you're taking, so then you're allowed to build there and leave your stuff there while you're building. But if someone gets damaged, so then it's your problem. But Reb Shimon Gamliel says that the guy he's allowed to leave his tools out there in public property even 30 days before construction starts. Mishnah Vav Shtei Ginais Zoagav Hayark. So we have a very interesting case here. So imagine if you have a hill with essentially 3 steps, and we're talking about, and one person owns the top step and he has a garden there, one person owns the bottom step and has a garden there, and then in the middle we just have this empty space sort of where there's some vegetables growing, which doesn't necessarily belong to either of them. And each of the floors is slightly overlapping over the one underneath it. Right? So now we have a question: who does this one in the middle belong to? Rabbi Meir says it belongs to the guy who has the garden on top of it. Rabbi Yehuda says it belongs to the guy who has the garden on the bottom. So now they're both going to explain themselves. So Rabbi Meir says the reason why the top guy, why it belongs to him, is because if the guy on the top decides to level out his field, basically, to level it down to the bottom guy's one. So it turns out that there's not going to be any field here, because he's going to end up just covering the whole thing in dirt. Sorry, so according to Rabbi Meir, it doesn't work. Why? Because he's just going to destroy the whole garden, meaning there's not going to be anything there. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, it belongs to the bottom guy, because if the bottom guy then decides to fill up his garden to fill it up, meaning to pour dirt on it to lift his garden up, so then he's going to end up destroying the whole garden, because he's going to cover over the whole middle step with dirt. So then, so Meir says, we see from here that both of them have a claim to it. So what do we do? So we see, where do these vegetables in the middle get their life from? So according to Rabbi Meir, so Rabbi Meir says that we have to see where they're getting their life from. What does that mean? According to Rabbi Meir, that the guy on the top step gets it, it's because Rav Meir holds that they get their nourishment from the air, and Rabbi Huda, who holds that the guy on the bottom gets it, is because he holds that it gets its nourishment from the ground, and it's the ground belongs to the guy on the bottom, and the air belongs to the guy on the top. Because as a rule, if you own a piece of land, you have all the way up and all the way down. So the guy on top has all the way down, which would include the garden, and the guy on the bottom has all the way up. So the ground comes from the guy on the bottom, and the air comes from the guy on top. And Rabbi Shimon Rabbi Shimon says that as long as the guy on top can sort of reach over the divider and pick some vegetables from this in-between garden, so then it belongs to him, and the rest, so whatever he can just reach over and pick belongs to him, and the rest belong to the guy in the lower garden. Mazdov, I'm finishing Maseches Bava metziah. Hope Emir Hashem will be starting Maseches Bava Basra tomorrow, and those are today's Mishnayos.